Well, hello, this is John Yates, and I chair the technology practice of the law firm Morris, Manning & Martin. And I'm very pleased today to be with Barry Etra. Barry is one of those very unique people in our community who has been a tremendous supporter of technology entrepreneurs and has also been an originator of many groups and organizations that have been huge supporters of the tech community. So, Barry, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me on.
So, Barry, I want to focus on a couple of key areas, but let's start out, first of all, give me a little bit of your background so that people know about where you came from, because it's a rich background that sort of leads right into what you're doing right now with the Raise Forum and with Keiretsu. So tell us a little bit, brief background on Barry.
So I was a manufacturing guy for a long time. I came down to Georgia to run a manufacturing plant south of Atlanta. And that was, my joke is that it was an offer I could have refused, but it got us down here and we like it a lot. And I drifted sideways after that blew up into a couple of things. One of them was alternative finance and nonprofit debt finance. And as the recession hit in 2009, 2010, it became harder and harder to get any funding anywhere. And somebody said, why don't you get involved in the early stage world? Because you're doing the same thing there. You're matching up companies and investors. And I did that for a few months and I realized this is pretty much chaos. Companies don't know the investors don't know the companies. There's no structured forum in which they can meet. And of course, my consultant head kicked in. I said, I know how to fix this. And a couple of people saw it and said, that's great, but it didn't really have anywhere to go initially. And about now 8.5 years ago, I went to Emory, to the guy who was the only one teaching entrepreneurship at Emory, Charlie Getz. And Charlie is a real world guy. Charlie is an amazing person. He started and sold 9 companies before he ever taught a class. But I went to him and I said, look, you're a real world guy. I know you'll get this. That $1 million to $5 million raise is where most of our companies go to die, everywhere in the country, really, but New York, Boston, and Silicon Valley. We can fix that here doing this. And he got it immediately. It took us another 10 months to convince Emory, but we ran our first Raise Forum in November 2015, and we've just run our 12th. We run every 6 months. There's a course around it at Emory at the business school, and where the students help out in the fall and do some of the preliminary weeding out.
That's great. Well, tell us a little bit about how you moved into the Raise Forum. And the Raise Forum just occurred for this most recent session. So tell us a little bit about Raise, why it's important for entrepreneurs, this recent event, and then I think you've got the next version coming up in November. So walk us through it.
So Raise is an attempt to fund Southeast companies at higher levels with Southeast money. Very plain and simple. And everybody, every time you read something in the Atlanta Business Chronicle, it was all about, well, we don't have enough funds for our own companies. And I thought, gee, why isn't somebody doing something about that? So my theory was if we could fund Southeast companies at higher levels with Southeast money, companies would stay and the whole enterprise would grow. And I originally thought about doing that just for Atlanta. And then I realized if I was looking at post-revenue companies, which we look at, there's not enough of a corpus in Atlanta, certainly wasn't at that time, at one time, to populate that. So we branched it out initially to Georgia and the 5 states that touch Georgia, because I wanted finalists to be able to drive in if necessary. And it became, there's a lot of education involved. I had to argue with a bunch of people from different states, South Carolina and Florida and Tennessee, who kept saying, no, we only want to fund our own companies. And I said, okay, finally, I said, send them to us. We'll help you. And now we have people who recommend companies to us from all those states. And during COVID, we branched out since nobody has to drive anywhere. We go as far north as Virginia and as far west as Louisiana. Wow. But that's the overriding thing. The overriding thing is let's fund more Southeast companies locally.
So tell us how it's organized, because I know you bring investors in, but there's some requirements there as well, the kind of investors you bring, the kind of companies you bring. Walk us through that process.
So on the company side, you only have to be from the Southeast. You have to have some revenue. I don't care how much. And you have to be looking for at least $500,000 in raise. So it's a pretty low bar there. On the investor side, we've said basically we only want the right people in the room. So you must be from the Southeast. You must be able to write a $250,000 check, although you don't have to write it. And you must be an active investor. And that was a more pressing issue when we were running them in these stadium-style classrooms at Emory. It's less of an issue in the virtual world. But this way, we can get right down to business because unless you're a member of our board or one of our sponsors, you're a presenter or an investor. That's it. And by far the largest group is the investors. We had over 70 investors signed up for this last one.
So, Barry, is that what separates Raise from some of the other events then? The fact you bring in so many investors? Talk a little bit about what's the differentiator, because obviously there's a lot of these events that go on out there, and there's a lot of competition, especially in this virtual world. But you've done it a little differently also.
Well, we're also the only funding forum in the Southeast, John. We're the only one specifically set up to fund companies. I think funding happens everywhere, but most of the time it's kind of a happy accident. If Venture Atlanta is a great event, but it's kind of a giant meet and greet. There are really no imperatives. Nobody has any pressure whatsoever to invest. I do stand up at Raise, and we throw in a couple of Phillips in the process that hopefully stimulate investment. But that's the key. If you're not focusing on that, yeah, you may get lucky, but you're not going to get a lot of investment as a potential or from people who are at the event. So that's what we do differently. We specifically state that we're here to fund Southeast companies with Southeast money. I would say I haven't found another one in the Southeast, frankly.
So talk a little bit about the affiliation with Emory. You alluded to that and your connections there. And when people think about entrepreneurship, oftentimes they think about Georgia Tech first, but Emory's very involved in this area too, and they've been very supportive of you in the Raise area, haven't they?
Yeah, so Emory has really stepped up a lot. When we started, there was not much there, but they've hired a great VP of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, Amelia Schaffner. They have created a Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. So they are hopefully going to catch up to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has an enormous head start. They do. But Emory comes at it from a different place. Emory comes at it from a life science space. Georgia Tech does too, but they don't have the medical school and the hospital system that supports that. So Emory is a tough character to nail down. They are like any university, they are widespread and they're siloed. So the med school doesn't know what the law school is doing and vice versa. But they have a tremendous amount of potential. Georgia Tech, as great as it is a public university. And all the money comes from state funds. So they have limited budgets. Emory also has limited budgets in a different way, but there are more opportunities there.
From your perspective as well, Barry, when you think about raising capital now in the Southeast, and you just came out of the Raise Forum, what's the current climate? I mean, at the seed level and the early venture level, is it easier now than it was the beginning of the pandemic? And do you think coming out of the pandemic that there's going to be a free flow of funds? What's your observation given what you've seen? Because you got your finger on the pulse of a lot of this activity.
I think a lot of this is growing and growing and growing. 5 or 6 years ago, I mean, we're going to talk about Keiretsu later, but if you had said to any Atlanta investor, oh, look, I want you to invest in this company, great CEO, great team, great product, et cetera, but they're going to 3 or 4 or 5 years from revenue, they would have given you a blank stare. That's changing, but that's not really to your point. To your point, there's more and more money moving in here, more and more people. I'm constantly getting people who actually want to come to Raise Forum as an investor. And I said, do you have an office down here? And they don't. I said, well, when you do, talk to me. Because yes, a lot of people invest in down here. Now, what you find now, the Angel Capital Association just came out with their report. The single largest area of investment in the country where investment is made is the Southeast. I would never have believed that possible, but the Southeast is number one, 22%. California was 17%. New England was 15%. But a lot of money is coming in here. People are understanding, and I think the fact that we are developing all these unicorns now out of Atlanta is helping a lot.
So tell us about Keiretsu then. Shift over to Keiretsu a moment and tell us a little bit what's going to be happening in the future there, because Keiretsu was very successful in the Southeast. Tell us, first of all, what's the nature of the group? How big is it generally? And then why we focus in the Southeast?
So Keiretsu is the largest and most active angel investment group in the world. And it's mostly a West Coast phenomenon. I knew about it because when I started Raise, I went around the country looking at models, and I went there because I heard they were the best in the world. Keiretsu is the total outlier in the angel investment world. They do probably 50 times the number of investments a year of the average angel group. They are 4 times larger in dollars than the next largest angel group. And they have slowly moved across the country, starting in Silicon Valley. And they're great for our area for a couple of reasons. First, they're very, very active. And I think by the end of 2021, they will be the number 1 largest angel investor in dollars in the Southeast.
Wow.
Which is most people don't know that, but it's happening because I see what's going on. And we don't have a lot of large angel groups. Second thing is Keiretsu satisfies one of my criteria. They don't have a home base. No, if you get investment from Keiretsu, you will never have to move. So that's a very big deal for the Southeast, I think. And third, they can do a lot of investments. They are experts at life science investments, which to my mind are the hardest ones to do.
Right. Well, that's an area too that we actually have a number of life science companies in the Southeast, but a dearth of capital there for sure.
Right. There's no real active life science venture group. Okay. There is one, but it's not particularly active. There's a smallish one in Chattanooga. There are a couple of, and once you get up in Tennessee, there are a couple there, but none of them I think are really active. I mean, there may not be anyone doing 10 investments a year.
Wow.
So that's a big deal. And if you think about who the most active venture groups in Atlanta, there's Fulcrum and there is BIP, now Panoramic. But even they are doing somewhere between 10 and 15 investments a year. Keiretsu does hundreds. That's a big deal.
So maybe a final question, Barry. Coming out of the pandemic, you're not going to necessarily have to use Zoom again. What are you going to do with Keiretsu? Is it going to be a face-to-face meeting? I know Morris, Manning, and Martin's been pleased to host many of the Keiretsu events. Are you planning to do a hybrid? Are you going to stay Zoom? How should people understand Keiretsu is going to exist post-pandemic?
I am pretty sure we're going to end up with a hybrid model. We will not be able to. It's expensive to do a good hybrid meeting. We've had that at Philadelphia, Keiretsu. It's been there for years. So that's already in place. The nice thing about Keiretsu now, the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic meetings are all run by one person, and they're a week apart. And you now have an option to go to one or the other or both. So if you cannot make the Atlanta meeting in person, and you can go to the other meetings virtually, and you can go to it live because they have it monitored and it's recorded. And I think that'll stay. One day, if we can gain a little more corpus in the Southeast, we'll have it down here as well. And we grew a lot in the last 2 months, a lot.
So let me ask a final question, Barry. Right now, we're in a very sort of transitional phase with respect to the pandemic. Fingers crossed, we come out of this, we get the vaccination rates up, we can take our masks off. Are you optimistic about the second half of the year and the ability to grow? Or do you think we're going to move into 2022 before we really sort of get to the next level? Or are you in a position where you're saying, look, people are, it's going to be about the same, or pessimistic? I'm always interested in hearing folks like you who have their finger on the pulse about whether are you thumbs up, are you sort of neutral, or you thumbs down?
I'm thumbs up. I really believe that we're coming out of this fairly soon. By the end of the third quarter, I think we'll go back to live meetings by then in proliferation. And I think there's a lot of people are realizing, if the stock market weren't blowing the doors now, there'd be even more angel investment. And people are realizing that it's a lot of opportunity. There are 2 or 3 really good groups now in Atlanta focusing on early stage companies that weren't there 3 years ago. That's a really good thing on the early side, which is, I think, probably the hardest side to do. And I think we've got a lot of momentum here. And I told you this before. I really believe Atlanta and the Southeast should be number 4. Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, and Atlanta in the Southeast. We have all the ingredients. We're getting there.
Well, Barry, I believe what you're saying. I agree with it. I think we are very close, thanks to people like you who have driven so much activity. Keiretsu, the Raise Forum, connections with Emory, and also let me just pat you on the back for your willingness, desire, and enthusiasm about working with other groups. I think one thing unique about Atlanta and the Southeast is people wanting to work together, and you've really helped to propagate that spirit of teamwork. So, Barry Etra, thanks for your great work. Thanks for what you're doing for the tech community and for being a part of the MMM Tech Law and Business Report.
Okay, thanks, John.